Well, welcome everyone. Somehow we managed to be late. We were ahead of schedule for a nanosecond, but we managed to be late. I want to start with many thanks to the esteemed group of panelists that you see arrayed up there on the screen. And I can't think of a more important topic to pick up right now than that of global collaboration, especially on the heels of President Trump's speech yesterday and then talking about collaboration today. I'm going to make just a few, 2-3 minutes of comments to frame this a little bit, and then I'm going to quickly turn to our panelists. We have 8 panelists. They all deserve your attention in those sidebar conversations, and we're going to chop along. So I'll ask the panelists to be very pithy and direct with your comments. So just a couple of comments. In today's, as I sat back and thought about this panel, in today's fractured world, it may be easy to take a downbeat and pessimistic view, especially if you're sitting in the US these days. But I wanted to take just a brief 30 seconds and recognize what has been achieved, because there are people in this room that are responsible for what has been achieved. The Paris Agreement was a landmark achievement in global cooperation, so I underscore global cooperation and action. Since then, it has bent the emissions curve downward. It has. Before Paris, we were on track to a 5 degrees Celsius. Now we're still on track to 2 degrees. We're not getting where we wanted, and 2 degrees is bad, but Paris has had an impact in each successive COP, however challenging, brings steadily increasing commitments and creates the framework for global collaboration. And I thought COP29 was an excellent example of that. However, at the same time, I want to be careful not to sugarcoat reality. We remain way off track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The current policy settings put us on a path to a temperature of 3 degrees Celsius, a lot lower than 5, but still a path that would see catastrophic impacts, which we're all living through. We live in a deeply polarized world. Yesterday I had deep shame. Today I have deep pride being with all of you, because you're all committed to doing something on this very important issue. We know climate change and collaboration on it is not a hoax or a con job. It's something real and important to deal with. In short, we can't tackle climate change without global collaboration, and that's extremely important. So I'm going to spin straight away to Amina. First up, you. And I'd like you to address multilateralism. It's under assault. I was going to do a little summary, but I don't need to do that because every speaker today, or every other speaker, has talked about the assault on multilateralism. If you could just outline for us, what options do you see for reform to multilateral institutions to make them more effective in addressing urgent, critical issues?
Thank you, Jean, and again, thank you to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for associating me and also to actually address these very critical issues. But prior to starting, you mentioned something very important. We're talking about the multilateral system. And here I can't help but mention Gramsci when he said that the old world is dying and the new one is struggling to be born. But now I think with the way things are going, I think the new one is here. And I think we saw that a few weeks ago at the SEO, where things are happening at that level. And but come back to our issue of climate change. We are heading towards COP 30 in a few weeks' time. So it means that the COP still remains a very important forum for dialogue. But I think we're all reminded that the COP21, the Paris Agreement, was a prime example of a successful COP, because this was a landmark accord that brought together nearly 200 countries together in a general consensus in the fight against climate change. But the success of COP21 was also based on the premise that there is a common problem, but calls for a differentiated approach and differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, and that multilateralism remains the world's vehicle for addressing climate change. So COP21's success was the success of multilateralism, but that multilateralism must remain inclusive and remain the world's vehicle for addressing climate change amongst other challenges, because it must be reiterated all the time that climate change remains a global issue and doesn't stay within borders. But long problems and evolving challenges like poverty, food insecurity, conflict, AI, health, biodiversity loss, migration, are not issues that can be solved in a span of a single political cycle. And they demand sustained political will, investment, and global cooperation over decades. And this is, again, one of the reasons why we call for strong institutions to be there. Because addressing issues like climate change cannot be addressed within the short-term electoral timeline of many national governments, and this is also compounded by volatile politics in many key nations, pose problem challenge for maintaining consistent policies. But the world needs more solutions, and we know that increasingly the issue of climate justice is being brought to the table, and this is where we are calling for transitioning to low-carbon economy, restoring ecosystem. This will require trillions of dollars in investment, much of which will need to be stimulated by a flow from richer nations to developing one and be supported by mobilized private capital. Here again, when we talk about capitalizing, whether it's called the Green Fund, whether it's called the Climate Fund, we are only talking about the need to address protection, adaptation, and again, it calls for something which is very, very fundamental. It calls on to recognizing how interconnected we all are in this world. So addressing this inequity is not only a moral imperative, but also a pragmatic one, as climate-induced instability is one part of the world will have triple ripple effect across the globe. And another prime reason why a response based in multilateralism is essential. Because at the heart of multilateralism lie the principle of shared responsibility, mutual self-interest around issues that impact every nation, regardless of economic status or geopolitical influence. And again, I stress on the point of the interconnectedness of these challenges, which is important. So what is now happening in the Amazon or in the Congo rainforest will affect communities as far apart as Florida, New Delhi, Nairobi, and New York. So multilateralism, with all its flaws, remains the best game in town. To abandon it would be to gamble with the future of the planet. It is vital also to enable developing countries to address the worsening impacts of climate change, and also to implement the global goal on adaptation. So again, we call here for climate finance, which must be equitable, transparent, predictable, sustainable, if we are to avoid a two-speed transition, where those most at risk from climate impacts are denied from low-emission, climate-resilient development by the high cost of capital and unsustainable levels of debt. And this is so true for many poorer countries, especially African countries, which are, of course, ridden with debt. So let us, first of all, then take note that we need the multilateral system, and this can shape climate governance at national level, and of course what is done at national level will inevitably impact the global scenario. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, I love your comments, Amina. Coming from the private sector, in the commitment for inclusiveness in the multilateral system, there's an efficiency issue. And that's what we're going to have to deal with on speed and scope and all that. And it occurred to me when Mukhtar this morning said that we're at the end of the era of design and we're on the era of implementation. This is where the multilateral system has to shine. Would you agree with that? Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Turning now, Nigar, coming to you. Given what Amina just talked about, in the face of the challenges of the UN and multilateralism, do you think the COP process is still fit for purpose as a tool for collaboration?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, dear colleagues. Well, definitely yes. Well, that question, you know, let's see what is happening now. We live in a world of unpredictability, right? We live in a world when international law is not working. In many cases, we see that. We live in a world of conflicts, trade wars, arms race. This is all happening now, and we can witness all this. And the green transition, this climate agenda, is the best thing that can happen, that can unite the global community. That's my strong belief. And I think that COP process, we can criticize this as many times as we want, but that's the best thing that we have so far, because what we've seen in Azerbaijan, the outcomes of COP29 were historic, not because of the decisions on climate finance, on Article 6, but it was the symbol and it was clear indications that multilateral system can work. And this is what we need, actually. So if you ask me, COP process is there. We should support this process. And also, one thing that I would mention that that looking at the political situation in the world, I think that we need a mechanism where there is a universal rules applicable for all, where small and large nations have the same set of rules. And the green agenda is something that can become that mechanism, because I think that we should be optimistic about that. And yes, we need to involve everyone, non-state actors, and as high-level champion, I had this chance to work with non-state actors, to work with private sector, to see how civil society is reacting to changes, to the overall green transition climate agenda, to see how young people are responding. So if you ask me, I think that that's a great thing to see how global community is responding to this challenge that we have. Yes, a lot has been done, not enough. We need to do more, but that's the best mechanism that we have so far.
Watching COP29, you and Mukhtar and the youth group and all that, you were so efficient. And I love the comment. I just want to underscore what you said, that it may look inefficient, but look at the inefficiencies in the world right now related to rule of law, trade. Oh my gosh. The complete disequilibrium and the political. So appreciate the comments.
Yes, and arms race, like it's conflicts everywhere. And green agenda is something that global climate action calls for universality. This is something that humanity has never done before. We are trying to come and to have this set of rules that will be applicable for all, and to have, to restrict ourselves in a sense that from emissions perspective. So I think, yeah.
I'm going to come back to you right after Manuel on COP30. So this is not Dan sitting next to me. And this is Manuel Bogar-Vidal, we're very honored to have, climate and energy global practice leader and former Minister of the Environment for Peru. So Manuel, I've had so many times to talk with you on so many issues, so it's hard to pick something, but can you talk about the ideas of collaboration and the lessons from the action agenda that started 11 years ago, and then kind of come back to you on that when he finishes?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Jean. It is true, the action agenda started 11 years ago. It was in Lima COP20, in which I used to be the president of the COP a year before of Paris, that we launched with the title Lima Paris Action Agenda, a place to convene actors by knowing that that would be so important to implement the agreement that fortunately we got in 2015. And look, friends, for now, the action agenda, it could be the most instrumental piece to continue moving this process forward. And fortunately, Brazil has understood that very well, and they are planning to revamp the action agenda as part of the COP30. So, to be more concrete, if we go into the reasons that made that possible, to create an action agenda and to strengthen cooperation by convening actors towards Paris, the point is how much those lessons are still useful to continue moving the process forward despite of the difficulties of the geopolitical context. And let me share with you some ideas in relation to that. The first one, we do need to be clear on the purpose of the COP30. And I think that Brazil is very clear in two things. The emotional thing, that it is we have to put all the actors together in taking care of this process. So we have to protect the agreement, we have to protect multilateralism, and we have to protect the climate talks. It is by having a clear understanding of that purpose that we could be able to get success by COP30. But the second purpose is implementation. So that is so, so key. And that moves me to my second reflection. What does it mean to talk about implementation? that we are progressing. You know that most of critics are trying to show that we haven't accelerated action, but it is not true. Clearly, we have already made good things in relation to energy transition, deployment of renewable energy, resilience, among many other topics. And we have to be more vocal in that sense, because it is by showing that we are implementing things that we will be more able to re-engage with people and re-engage with actors and sectors. And that moves me to a third element. We have to have a common thread. Why? Because people is always thinking that the COPs are useless, that we are not progressing, that what we do have is delegates just talking but not doing anything useful to cut the consequences of climate change. And that is not correct. In COP28, we got what it is called the global stocktake. And in COP29, the roadmap from Baku to Belém. Probably what we do need it is to change those names. Nobody will understand us if we continue talking about GST, global stocktake. Nobody knows what does it mean. We do need to show to the world that we have not only clear plans, but clear ways to implement. And the roadmap of Baku and the global stocktake are two ways to implement, and that is why the importance of what Brazil is doing. But also, what we do need it is to have strategic approaches to overcome the geopolitical limitations. And I am going just to mention it because I don't have time to extend it in each one of those. The first one, this must be a COP in which the economy that it is maturing will show that this is an irreversible and unstoppable process. It's the economy. Despite of the lack of political support, it's the economy that will show that progress. Second, it's fantastic that we have Brazil including an ethical dialogue, because for the first time ever we will have in a COP the discussion around the moral imperative of moving this process forward. The third element, it is science. We have to make science to be more vocal because it is the only way to deal with misinformation and disinformation. And that is so key. The fourth element, it is the non-state actors agenda that I've already mentioned. And the fifth one, that it is for me so important, it is a synergetic relation in between our climate objective, our biodiversity objective, and even the SDGs. It is by bringing together ways to develop more effectiveness that we will be able to overcome the geopolitical difficulties. So let me finish by saying I am fully optimistic that by working together we will be able to get success in COP30 and to continue moving this process for the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Come to you in just 30 seconds, but just two comments. On the economy piece, I belong to an organization where we were spending $10 million with climate analytics and others to assess profitability of investment in renewables. Renewables are staggeringly cheap, and what we're finding for us, it's going to save us $1 billion a year by 2030. So I think there is an economic argument for the economy and for the private sector going forward. I think that's really important. I'll stop there. Nika, on these action plans, do you want to talk about COP30 in a little bit more detail about how, because I thought Mukhtar this morning was really, I love the comment that the era of design is done, it's the era of implementation. What does that mean in terms of the action items in COP30?
Yes, one thing that I wanted to actually mention, just to add what Manuel has just said. Yesterday, I've been on an event where there was the survey results announced, that Business Breakthrough Barometer 2025. This is the WBCSD organization of the CEOs together. They've done a survey, and I just want to share that what was their outcome, that despite political volatility, 91% of leaders say their businesses have maintained or increased net zero investments over the past year. And they have done this survey in March and May, and it was done among 300 executives across 50 countries. So this is just to show that private sector is on board and they understand the importance of the transition. But since Dan is not here, as you know, there are two champions, and we are working closely with COP30 presidency on unified action agenda. So this is the concept that the presidency has announced, and meaning that so far each COP was coming with a set of initiatives, and there's a legacy of initiatives, and this is a great thing. But in many cases, we don't know which initiative is working, which is not. So the idea of COP30 presidency, together with UNFCCC and champions, is to make this kind of a portal, you know, to unified action agenda, 5 years vision, and to group all the initiatives in 6 axes, they call it, so 6 kind of directions, like agriculture, energy, etc. And so far, what they've done, that was a very interesting practice when they have been collecting all the initiatives, and there are more than 600 initiatives so far to now. And I think that, and they also do activation groups. They are inviting civil society, private sector, all the stakeholders to come back with feedbacks, how they see this, you know, 5 years vision, and to connect it to global stocktake. So basically, COP30 presidency has announced that they will not be coming with new initiatives because there are already enough initiatives globally. So what they are trying to do, they are trying to bring some efficiency to the process, basically to group them and to put all the initiatives together to see what is working, what is not. So this is something that that has been announced, and I think that in Belém we will see this approach to the action agenda, which I think makes total sense. You know, really, like more than 600 initiatives so far, and just to bring some efficiency. It doesn't mean that there will be limitations to other COPs to come with new initiatives, but it would be good to have, you know, some clarity and transparency about what is working and what is not.
You know, in the private sector, we say there are a number of things that are really important, but number one is closure, closure, closure. If you have an idea, you have a plan, and you put it together, getting it on, it's not worth anything unless you get it on the ground. So I love that. Could you rattle off the 6 axes? You mentioned agriculture, energy.
I need to look, but
That's
it's
fine.
like,
That's
yeah,
okay.
it's all the sectors, agriculture, energy, green skills there. So basically they have grouped it all. And under the 6 axes, they have 30 activation groups. So basically SMEs and the green skills, digitalization, and all the sectors are there. So now they have this kind of, you know, practice that they are doing with all the stakeholders.
Well, it sounds like one giant collaboration pot. Going forward. All right, Slatko, I'm going to come to you next, but just a couple of comments. Oh, do you want to just run through? No, all right. Well, we can come back to that in a minute. Slatko, I'm going to come to you. I want to talk about climate leadership, and it's on my mind. And what I'd like to start with is, how do you Trump-proof the climate issues? No discussion on climate and global cooperation can ignore the major geopolitical shifts we're witnessing. So let's tackle the withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. We all know that's happened. However, the U.S. has an outside role on climate. We showed what it could do with the IRA. That's gone. But the U.S. still has unparalleled weight and influence. Can you walk us through what you can expect, where you can expect climate leadership to come from now that the U.S. has stepped back? And you're so involved in the UN and a global perspective. I thought that would be a good question for you to address.
There was a report on fulfillment of SDGs, latest one, which, among other things, are showing that there are countries who are ranked according to their commitment to multilateralism and to SDGs. And of course, Barbados is country number 1 on the top list out of 194 countries.
Who?
Barbados.
Barbados, okay.
Barbados. Okay, good. Guess who is the last? The last one is the country from your question about how much they are interested in multilateralism along the lines of SDG. And it was before this administration. Now, having said so, it's the big countries like China and US. Last year, they were the first time in the history of that previous 10 years that they came to be ranked among top 50 countries, which means that actually big countries generally speaking, are not moving so fast. Now, having said so, I think it is very important to underline that when we talk about something which is called National Voluntary National Report about how much we progress with SDGs, there are only 3 countries who don't care about it. Myanmar, Haiti, and again, the country from your question, that did not even make voluntary national report. 191 countries did, which means that there is certain will.
And that last one was the United States?
Of course, the
Yeah,
country from
yeah.
your question.
Just
Oh,
wanted
yeah,
to
I'm
be
sorry,
clear,
well,
so no one's
I thought it
leaving
was
it.
obvious that the country from your question is the United States. Okay,
Right.
so every time I country from your question, it's United States. So I can be shorter by saying U.S. Anyway, what I'm trying to say that is, it is obvious that when speaking about leadership, part of your question is, when we are talking about organized countries, stable countries, countries that do not need so much reforms, that they need to have good operational functioning mechanism and maintaining and so on, then the leadership is not so much, let's say, relevant like in countries that are going through reforms and countries that are trying to find itself to be much more better organized. That's where leadership walks in. Now, when we speak about a topic that is everyone is in the same boat. We are in the same boat, and that's basically speaking where the countries can differ, like they differ in this report that I just mentioned, because of the leadership in certain countries who are really trying to do their best according to the circumstances and to resources that they do have. So in that sense, I think it is especially a new challenge that we will witness very soon. We are all proud and we were all advocating how COP29 made big step when it comes to financing of sustainable climate change, sustainable development goals, and climate change in general. But we all know that that is far from being enough. Why I want to underline that. This funding is going to compete with the funding that is definitely going to be bigger and bigger, which is funding for defense. Because now, overall, just to give you some figures, I mean, last year, the overall global spending for defense was in the area of $2.5 trillion. 55% goes to NATO countries. Now, when you take ODA from last year, ODA is on a level of 0.33% of GDP, which is far, far away from what is agreed and so on and so on. So only 4 countries are actually going higher than 0.33, they're in the area of 0.7%, which is Danish, Nordic countries, basically speaking, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Luxembourg. Now, my point is very simple. For defense, already there is bigger support or bigger funding of defense, which goes 20+ times more than for what we are talking about, and it is going to increase.
Okay.
That's what we have to be warning everyone around. And last point, Jean, this morning we had brilliant intervention by Gordon Brown. He was talking about the hope and about emotions that people are driven by. I think that climate change as #1 issue for us, together with inequality, are the issues that we have to be tackling global constituency as leaders, more from perspective of emotions than by the facts. That's my point.
Great, thanks. Actually, Slatko, I'm going to come back to you and ask you more specifically to focus on China as a leader. But before I do that, I have a note here that Antonia has to leave, and she's got a very important perspective. She's the Minister for Women and Gender Equality for Chile, and I'm going to ask her about the fact that women bear the brunt of climate change in so many ways. It's not gender neutral, and I'm hoping that you can give us an overview of the impact on women, and especially the special role that women play in defending human rights. And I think women are far better collaborators than men. So if you can comment on that as well, I appreciate it. Antonia?
Thank you, and good afternoon. Well, Chile is the second Latin American country at the ranking of exposure to the climate crisis. So Our country has an economy highly dependent on natural resources, mining, forests, fisheries, and those exploitation combined with the impacts of the climate crisis, of course, generate social and environmental tensions that affect women differently, particularly the indigenous, rural, and Afro-descendant women. So I just wanted to exemplify so tell you just one example. As I said, we are highly exposed to specifically to drought, and just in 2022, our biggest watering program remained to be getting only to 30% of our women. So thanks to our gender mainstreaming and budgeting, we could take those programs to 50% of women, considering special programs to taking the considerations of the civil and family laws and structural inequities. So these women play a key role on protecting ecosystems, food security, community resilience, and yet they face hiding it and gender differentiated risks, increased care burdens, limited recognition of occupations related to agriculture and scale fishing, exclusion from access to resources, and higher levels of violence and criminalization when defending the environment. So that is why it is essential to move forward of setting straight that women are specifically charged with the effects of climate crisis, to move on to gender-based solutions. And so when we say that the climate crisis is not gender neutral and that responses must be connected and implemented at both local and global levels, we think specifically on getting a higher ambition on the next COP, and for an example, adherence to the Escazú Agreement and the recent protocol for the protection of human rights defenders that has been launched by Chile and Costa Rica, and that has a key role for women human rights defenders, and of course the BBNJ, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Act and Agreement.
Thank you. And I know you have to go, but thank you very much for your comments.
Yes.
I think the role of women as collaborators, I know what I've seen in the field, having spent time in, 120 countries and negotiating deals and all that, what I found is women on the ground collaborate in different kinds of ways. And I think that's something that speaks to the importance of diversity in all we do. If we don't have diversity, we never get to the right answer. So I'm sorry if that sounds a little preachy. Well, maybe I mean it to be, but I think it's important to remember that. So Slatko, I'd like to come back to you. And it's funny because while I was sitting here, I had said to Slatko I was going to come back to you on China and ask you about global leadership with China. This just pushed to my phone. China pledges first ever emissions reduction target. Is it enough? In the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post today, 7 to 10% reduction first time. So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about China.
First, Jean, you stole my line from my computer because that's exactly what I was wanting to point out.
Oh, you got the same push?
I got the same point. I got the same point, not from Wall Street, but it was on CNN. I found it, BBC and CNN. I don't know why I did it, because anyway. So you're right, but the China is supposed to, let's say, the idea is by 2030 to come to the peak of the overall carbon emission. And the idea is by 2060 to be cut down to zero. Now,
net zero.
Net zero.
Big difference, not zero. It's net
well,
zero.
of course, no one is planning to make zero.
No, we are, by 2030.
Okay.
Yeah, mining industry, 2030, $6.2 billion investing. Net zero is an oil and gas derived derivative policy because it relies on carbon capture and subsidies. So,
right.
Sorry.
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that obviously China is showing to everyone that they are unquestionably, and they use last 10 years to become #1 country when it comes to the technology for the solar, for the wind, and for renewables in general. Having said so, we have a problem that China is trying to manage obviously significantly, which is their demand for energy consumption is growing so much because of the overall industry growth. And at the same time, they're trying to just scale it down to as much as possible. But last night on reception that president of country from your question was having, he said that they are planning in this country to double the consumption of energy by 2030 because of data centers, okay? So if data centers go in direction that some people are saying that they will, then the need for energy is going to rapidly accelerate and almost explode to the figures that we cannot handle today. And everyone is now talking about data centers and about new energy that is needed for those data centers. So my point is very simple. China is definitely trying to show that as a technological potentials, which they have, should be used in a way according to the principles that they are saying that they are fulfilling. And instead of waiting what our host country in here is going to do, and knowing that without our host country doing what it should do, what we think they should do, we have the rest of us. We have to do what we can do and try to make, let's say, impact on this country, but not waiting for this country to become leader in this area.
That's great. Just to note, 90% of green products are produced in China. 90%. And they're becoming staggeringly cheap. The U.S. is, it's a self-inflicted wound not to use their electrolyzers and some of their other equipment because they're so much less expensive while maintaining quality as well. Data centers are a huge issue. And it's not just emissions, it's water as well. So that's going to be a big issue. And I live in the area that has the biggest in the world in Northern Virginia of data centers, and we're drowning in power prices and water needs. So thank you very much. Igor, I'm turning to you to just follow this line of climate leadership by governments. And Slavko maybe stole a little bit of your thunder on defense spending, but I think it's still important to understand, how do we deal with governments prioritizing spend and action away from climate change or nature and slow rolling on some of these issues when you've got defense, national security, competitiveness at home. Can you deal with that and give us your perspective?
Thank you. Picking up on what Zlatko and you have talked about, and gave a very graphic example about current defense spending, which is about $2 trillion, I think, roughly. But at the same time, we're talking about, let's say, 1.2, 1.3 trillion annual expenses necessary to take forward SDG agenda, for example. Of course, one cannot be illusionary enough to believe that governments all of a sudden will give up defense spending in favor of SDGs. It's not happening. It's actually going the other way around. And pretty much the same time we discussed in Sevilla, we discussed Compromiso in Sevilla, and we discussed about blending finance, innovative finance, and so on, that has to combine public funds with private funds to provide with new mechanisms to finance SDGs, climate change, and so on. So pretty much the same time there was NATO summit, and governments decided, leaders decided to increase, not overnight, but in the next 5 to 10 years, the defense spending from 2% target to 5% even. Of course, 3.5 more focused on defense spending, 1.5 a little bit of a game and statistics massage to make sure that everything governments like infrastructure spending is also counted into 5%. But inevitably you end up with a fiscal conflict, and you need to prioritize goals. So in this case, if you decide to and rich countries decide to spend more on defense, you expect another round of adjustments. So everybody else will also look for additional money to spend on defense, and so on and so on, which moves us even further away from some of the climate targets in terms of providing public funds. So unless, and I wouldn't be surprised, it might sound cynical, but I wouldn't be surprised if one day EU came forward and said, well, green arms and green ammunition. So let's make arms from green steel, green aluminum, whatever. I wouldn't be surprised, even something like that. Let's green the defense industries. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not endless, reservoir where you take whatever you want. It is more complicated than that. When you look at the state of the public finances in the rich countries, many run unsustainable budget deficits, and they will have to correct their spending and adjust for that. At the same time, some of the countries, when it comes to cutting spending, they prioritize foreign aid and official development assistance. So whole continents start thinking, like Africa, start thinking about, okay, we need to turn to ourselves. We need to find some, inner strength to deal with problems that we're going to face. And you're quite right when you talk about the impact of climate change. Before this panel, I was checking the news, and you could see the impact of super typhoon in China on bashing southern China. Scientists are even talking about disruption of North Atlantic oceanic system, which can dramatically change the climate everywhere. Polar caps have not been there all the time. They're a relatively new phenomenon, but they're humans have been around for all sorts of humans for, let's say, past 2 million years, and in that period, yeah, there's been polar caps and also the Gulf Stream and so on and so on. So I think, and that's my actually key remark. I very much sympathize with COP chairing countries, and all the efforts that are put together to coordinate the passage of a declaration, making decisions and so on. But the other day there was Mario Draghi, who was commissioned by European Commission to prepare a report on EU global competitiveness. And a year after, his remark was, you see, nothing much has been done. So, piling up all those declarations is probably inevitability in the world of active diplomats and in the diplomatic world. But where I actually put more emphasis and more hope is not public leadership, honestly, it's corporations and business and private sector. I think when you calculate the CO2 emissions, you'll find out that there is a huge percentage coming from, that can be associated with corporations in terms of CO2 emitted. And you see that there's a vicious, in a way, a certain vicious circle. AI requires more electricity, so more investments in energy. The more prosperity means also that we consume more. So there has to be more sustainable solutions to all that. So this is where I'd like to put more emphasis and more hopes in terms of innovation going on, in terms of new solutions, in terms of, because even in China, it's not that government has decided and everybody should follow. No, there's enormous amount of innovations coming bottom up. Companies providing new solutions, which very much is coherent with whatever government policy is. So I think that where it is useful to put more focus and build more synergy and synchronize business approaches with government and public policies.
Great, thank you. Necessity is the mother of invention, to use an old expression, and innovation, I think we have to turn to the private sector. I'm glad you raised that, because the private sector is absolutely key to invest in innovation. And remember the earlier comment I made that we've got some very interesting things that we're going to roll out at COP30 on it's more profitable to have renewables and green energy than to use oil and gas. And I think you've got to follow the money in the end. So I think the private sector has to play a role in this as well. Rosen, I'm coming to you. You've got about 4 or 5 minutes here, and then I'm going to turn Patricia to you as a cleanup hitter here. I'm counting on you to helicopter up a little bit and talk about cooperation, original cooperation, as we talked about last night.
Thank you, Jean. It's really a great question. I have to say, 10 years ago, I was here in my capacity as the President of Bulgaria, so proud, putting my signature on the Paris Agreement, putting my signature on the SDGs. That was amazing atmosphere of global consensus. We came together in something that makes sense for the next generations. And yesterday I looked at the highest possible tribune on the world, which is the United Nations, looking not at the statesman who was opening. I looked at Illman, who was spreading propaganda and lies, including about the green transformation and the climate change. And I was very sorry, because the only way to solve a problem is not to manipulate it, is not to hide it, face it, and bring solutions. That happened also in my country. So if you look at all the scientific data you can imagine, we have them everywhere. In my country, which was so proud to have a normal climate, 4 seasons, a lot of water, a lot of mountains, and just looking at the data, it's a devastating change in 10 years. It's just in 10 years' time. The highest possible temperature registered, at least water ever registered, like areas of a country that was swimming in water, now question is there water at all? And on top of that, we could never imagine a record number of wildfires, 15,000 just in a year. You can talk about Greece, you can talk about Turkey. No, that was Bulgaria. And by facing that drama and dilemma, of course, the very simple question is, okay, but there is always solutions. And I was very proud that we started a process a long time ago that brought solutions. For example, regional cooperation was there when there was a wildfire in Greece. For example, Bulgarian firefighters will be there as a part of a mechanism to exchange and help. Or when there was a wildfire in Bulgaria, Italian planes were coming to help. We were more efficient together. We established a mechanism of cooperation. But we integrated the private sector, creating a magical word, which is called a market. Because actually, the green transformation creates amazing opportunities for the private sector and for people. Just look at the data in my country again. So as we started the green transformation, today I can say that in a sunny way, in a sunny day, the whole economy of Bulgaria could be powered only by solars. Even we have nuclear power stations, all of that. We backed up those old solars with batteries. Bulgaria was the world record breaker for 2024 of installing batteries per capita. And now the whole economy could be run on solars, 100%, backed by batteries. What we discovered is that creates a market where even normal people can benefit from investing into this. But the region benefited into that. We created a stock exchange where, for example, sunny days in Greece could benefit of selling energy in the region, or the opposite. Creating a market that works for everybody. And last but not least, because there was a conversation now about AI and investments into AI data centers. What we discovered in my country is that actually today you have not just the hyperscalers, call them 100 general AIs that are eating all the data, but you will have thousands of specialized AIs on top of the general AIs. And you already have it. AI for robotics, AI for fighting cancer, AI for defense, AI for doctors, AI for whatever you can take. All those AIs happen based on a very simple question. Do you have compute power? Compute power is measuring the competitiveness of a single country today as nothing more than just this very simple number. And because of my country happily invested into a lot of diversified and the green transformation, solars, wind, and whatever, now we are attracting a huge investment into AI data centers because we have diversified energy. As a result of this, we believe we can help also the region to address its own competitiveness in the future, because whenever those AI gigafactories happen and wherever they happen, they serve the competitiveness for the country that is a host, but also the competitiveness in the region. So there is a good news that out of the problems, we can raise new hope, new industries, and of course, new perspectives for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosen. Just a follow-up. I was talking to a New York Times reporter today briefly, and he was reminding me of the global consensus you talked about in 2015 after Paris. And he reminded me of quotes by Obama and others. And he also reminded me of the uptick in investment that occurred as a result of that global, you could see it in global economies, the uptick in investment. And he was talking about it in comparison to what happened yesterday. And so I think it's something for us to reflect on for sure. Just one comment on leveraging the market. I'm come from the private sector, I want to do that, but that assumes that you've got a level playing field. So that comes back to climate justice. So Patricia, I'm coming to you for about 7 minutes, but I will come back to Manuel and Nigar. You've got those 6 issues that we talked about for COP29, and then Amina, if you will, you'll close us out on climate justice with a 1-minute kind of thing. All right, Patricia, you have done, I have been so impressed with some of the work that we've had a chance to talk about in the past. I know you've done a lot of work on climate finance, and climate finance is a big issue, right? If you don't have the money, you can't get it on the ground. But you've done it at the grassroots level. And your Climate Finance Access Hub is a model for many. And listen to these numbers, 8 million for 500 million. I mean, that's an investment I want to make, right? So let me turn it over to you to talk about climate financing and what you've done at the grassroots level.
I think the most important thing to say is that it is absolutely...
You're going to move it a little closer to your... There you go.
That it's absolutely dependent on collaboration and cooperation, but not just between countries, but in relation to all the technology and the international agencies. So let me tell you why it was so important for us. You know that the Commonwealth is 56 countries, that's 2.7 billion people, but 32 of the 56 countries are small developing countries. And we have, therefore, the preponderance of those who suffer the most from climate change, but they are also the least able to have the technology and the empirical data in order to verify that which they know will totally change the paradigm in which they sit. And so what we had to do is to look at who had that data. And I'll give you an example. Many of our small states were making applications to the Green Fund and the Adaptation Fund, spending millions of dollars to make those applications, all of which were failing. And when they asked why, they said, you have not got the empirical data. So we asked a question, who does have that data? Well, UNITAR, UNISAT, the British Space Agency, other people had that data. And so what we did is we created something called common sensing, which took the geospatial data, which was enabling us to better predict and better prevent what was going to happen. Using that data, we were able to help our member states to apply that data to successfully make applications. But we did something more. We created in Mauritius, I'm really glad to have Amina here, a climate finance access hub, because we had to understand what did those who were giving the money need us to prove in order to get the money. We then put climate finance advisors in each of the countries that we could afford, and we enabled them to enable the countries to make the applications. And with just 8 million, we got almost 500 million in the hands of our member states. I think it's 495 million to date, but we've got another 500 million in the pipeline. And what does that mean for our member states? Because most of that money is going on adaptation. It means that they can actually have the ability to fight, and most of them don't have the ability to fight unless they are enabled to do that. And it's been an extraordinary thing because it hasn't just been the Climate Finance Access Hub and the Common Sensing. We also created Meridian, which is about debt management. We have, for 45 countries, about $4 trillion under management, and that is private and public. Why is that important? Because there's a direct correlation between the level of indebtedness in some of these developing and small states and climate disasters. And that means that we can aggregate and disaggregate the debt to enable us to identify the loss and damage so that we are able to help the member states get better. This is collaboration across countries, regions, and entities, but business is really important, because if you follow the money, what we're seeing, and what you have said, Jean, and others, is we are soon going to get to the tipping point where it is economically more prudent and fiscally robust to go green, not because it's cool, not because it's chic or woke, but because it makes economic sense. And that data, that sharing of data, is fundamentally important to all of us. And I do think that the technological development that we've seen has exponentially improved our opportunities, if we work together, to be the difference we need to make. And I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. People are always saying to me, you've always been optimist, Patricia. Are you an optimist now? And I say, I'm neither. I'm just determined. And I think what we see is that if we use that determination, and I've been listening all day to what everyone's been saying, and what I see is that we, between us, have a huge amount of power if we choose. Technological power, political power, economic power, but for so long as we don't pool that expertise and power, we won't succeed in making the difference. But I think we can. And if we wanted an antidote to what happened yesterday, today is part of that antidote. Because I absolutely know from looking at the things that we've done, and small organization with little money, but because we created the Blue Charter, the Living Lands Charter, Meridian, the Climate Finance Access Hub, Common Sensing, all these different elements enabled us to have a holistic response. And I think we can all do this, and we can do it together.
What I love about your comments, Patricia, is replicate what works and not change again, back to the implementation piece. I was impressed when I heard this a year ago in London, and what you've done is pretty amazing, and we need to replicate it. And just like I was talking about the private sector, you're talking about the public sector, where it makes economic sense to make this investment. And I will just say, I was on a roundtable yesterday with the head of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, and he was talking about small AI. I was thinking about your data and enabling developing countries, small countries with small AI to develop the kind of data that you need and get that power.
And we've created the performance analysis for all 56 countries. So we're able to identify that which works, that which does not work, and replicate and share, which has really made an enormous difference. And it's been using private and public sector. So we've brought in lots of private sector partners who've been willing to work with us, share their data, particularly to the small countries. We did AI training for them. We created a consortium with all the big AI companies in order to enable this to happen in a cost-effective, cost-efficient way and enable justice to be more even. So the partnership involves all of us in whichever sector we happen to work. And we can do it.
Awesome, awesome. We have a few seconds. I'm turning to you, Manuel. We had an open question about the 6 axes. He's just gonna would you just tell us what those are? And then Amina, close this down in 20 seconds.
Okay. Can I take advantage of having the mic to say something else or not?
We're out of time. Yeah, give us the 6 and you can give us a 2-minute or a 1-minute commentary.
1 minute. So the 6 axes identified by Brazil to trying to create this economic common thread to implement Paris Agreement are related to first, energy, industry and transport, forest, ocean and biodiversity, agriculture and food systems, cities, infrastructure, resilient cities and infrastructure, and fostering human and social development. That is the 5th one. And cross-cutting, it is enablers, in which finance, it is for sure so important. 30 seconds. You know that I am wondering, after 10 years of Paris Agreement, should we give up? Or we have to recognize that the Paris Agreement was developed with a clear long-term vision, mid-term vision, and short-term vision. So 2030, decisive decade, 2050, the net zero, long-term vision, the 1.5. And I think that still there are opportunities to strengthen and to continue implementing Paris Agreement. But it is true that we do need to bring some other elements into the table. Securities. To strengthen the security discussion related to climate, it is key. Also, what it is important, the economy, something that Brazil is currently working on. Trade and climate, something that Brazil is looking even, I think it's planning to create some kind of fora in relation to trade and climate. So we can contribute to the debate by recognizing the current reality of the world.
Yeah, trade's really important. As you know, it was one of the topics, but nobody picked it up. Amina, can you just close this down with a gracious way you do that?
Thank you. We're just talking about climate justice, and I think this is an area that is impacting women more than anything else, because if we look at the African continent and we look at the 30-plus countries that Patricia's mentioned, small island developing states, we hardly contributed more than 4% of greenhouse gas emission. And yet these regions and these countries are really very badly impacted. So if you are going to talk about climate justice, we're talking about empowerment of all empowerment, empowerment of technology. It is not a charity, I think we must highlight that, giving the funds and also the power to these women and of course to the wider continent. It is not charity. Why? Because we need this fund for adaptation, because at the end of the day, our region represents the lungs of the world, and by empowering, by making the region adapt to all these the problems with climate change, we are going to be helping the world, because we will empower the people, we'll sort out immigration, for example, and of course, we'll ensure food security, but I think more importantly, we'll ensure the ecosystemic services that keep all of us alive. And this is something we don't speak about enough, because our region, small island states, and many of these tropical hotspot, they keep us all alive, they keep us all together. So we need to do something about it. Thank you.
And that's part of the global collaboration. Let's thank the panel. Weren't they awesome? Thank you, everybody.